Good morning. All right. We are going live. Deviating. Good morning. Good morning. We are deviating from the usual plan and setup. But hopefully I can do this. I got two phones going right now because it's Friday. And yet another episode, I guess this is, of how to align with transformation. And I'm excited about today's topic because it has a little bit of a story to it. Basic story. Before we get started, hi, I'm Sara. Welcome back. It's Friday. I go live every Friday to talk about those little things or the things that no one really tells you how to do when you're trying to change your life or change your lifestyle. And today I thought we would talk a little bit about deviancy. So, I'm deviating from my original setup because I am at my mom's house, and usually I have, the live stream from my computer and it goes to YouTube. My assistant will help me with that later, but I left my computer at home. I just left and I just grabbed, I still have electronics, clearly. But I left what I needed to at home because I really didn't want to be in the same space. And I figured this was just my own personal relation to escapism and what does it mean in our lives when you're coming from an old way of thinking and understanding the world and having mental health concerns or issues. I can't deviate too much back into the sun because my blonde eyes, I'll be squinting the whole time. Or I could just do it, could sit here with our sunglasses on because I am that person who will wear sunglasses inside and not care because they're prescription. But this week, I have been talking with some of my clients about lying. And that's where deviation and deviancy kind of came into topic this week, and I want to talk about it. So I'm going to give you a little bit more of kind of the human behavior, educational research side of, what does deviancy actually mean? What does it look like? And then with different forms of it. I'm not going too much into the extremes of criminal deviancy, although that is one of my specialties or interest, but I will go into more of the personal side of deviancy and escapism, a couple of stories just to help maybe how I've made sense of it, and I'm aware of it in my life so I don't necessarily get caught up in resisting it. But one of the cool things, so not only was it showing up in my sessions this week about, and I'm working with a lot more of those middle-aged or younger adult aged clients right now who are kind of coming out of unhealthy relationships, especially with their parents, if they do have more of an immature parent. And it's natural to lie. A lot of parents, when I was working more with younger, and I tried working with younger populations and working with families is difficult just because of the integration of all the different roles in the systems, and then implementing change really does have to happen from an adult standpoint, child standpoint too. But my point being is a lot of parents have asked me as a professional, why is my kid lying? Why are they doing this? Lying is bad. Now, by no means am I saying lying is good from here on out, but I am saying lying is natural. It is a natural human behavior. Deviancy is natural to the human nature. We don't necessarily, as humans, we don't have just one way. We have two sides of the brain. We have two eyes. We have two hands. We have things that deviate from one another. Sometimes we call them symmetrical, but I personally have noticed not only in my own, more intuitive experience, but my more intellectual experience of they both serve a purpose. Honesty and lying only exist because they coexist. So when we're talking about deviancy and lying starts to come up, that is a natural part of development, of childhood development. We have to try out both. And part of that is because as children, not only are we trying to innately test our security within our parents, but we're also building trust within ourselves. So if you don't ever mistrust people, then you're not ever really going to trust yourself, because that is ultimately, you know, one of the first stages of development when it comes to learning the world. So when we talk about deviancy, lying is actually quite important for human development. When we talk about and the difference between deviancy and escapism, let's talk about that real quick. So deviancy is just kind of going off the beaten path, right? We're trying things, we're determining whether or not this is something that feels good, that we're connected to. Escapism is trying to disconnect from something that we're trying to run from. So they're very similar in a way, but there's slight differences. Now, and those are in just definitions, right? But when it comes to what it looks like and how it manifests in behavior, one of the more, like we were talking about lying, that's probably one of the more common forms of deviancy. But escapism is probably one of the more common forms of self-sabotage. And this is where most people engage probably more in escapism than they realize, or it's uncomfortable to actually acknowledge that we are escapists. I escaped here to the coast because I live in a city, so I wanted to be near water. It has been, a stressful couple of weeks because all these new things are happening and change is happening. And Maisie, what you doing? All of these new things are happening. I don't know if you can see her on Facebook, but she's exploring. All these new things are happening in my life, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all, even though they're good, doesn't feel, it's a lot of feeling, right? So escapism tends to happen when we are uncomfortable with where we are and we try to disconnect from that. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but where people, in my experience professionally in helping them, reconnect with themselves as best as possible, I've just noticed that escapism is what is the challenging thing, and deviation is what is the necessary thing. And both of them hold place. But I consider escapism more of a desire or want-based driven behavior, and deviation more of a need-based behavior. So when we talk about lying again, and why it's a natural part of human and child development, is because children tend to do it as a way of getting their needs met. Now, when they're posed typically with a challenging situation, so a parent providing parenting or having a reaction to something, deviation in the form of lying tends to come from that moment where the reaction happens. And so what happens, and because deviation and escapism are naturally built into the human process, this lighting is not all that great. When deviation is built into the natural process, you can't see when it happens. The brain is self-protecting. So therefore, and it's pretty automatic in how this works. But in clinical terms, we call it dissociation. So under an immense amount of stress, the brain just kind of the off switch of think of train tracks when, it's switching gear. They're on the same tracks and all of a sudden it's on a different track. Just in that quick of a time period do we deviate from the original intention of responding, as if we outside looking in, we want a response. But what happens naturally to the human brain is that we react. So when our desires are challenged or our needs are challenged, is it that natural deviation happens to a lying behavior to protect our needs, to protect our sense of security. And that's where our needs are really based in when it comes to emotional needs and emotional intelligence helps us respond. But emotions are our need for security, our need for food, shelter, water, safety and security. That's that foundational need. So when we're confused about why is our society going, it's because we have deviated so far into the natural response. Let me not mix the words. The natural reaction. and we have not been able to learn how to actually engage the natural response. So that's where therapy can help with understanding that. But I want people to understand outside of therapy is just getting an understanding of what your natural reaction patterns are, so you can determine when it is that you're escaping. So I think a lot of people don't realize, especially if you bring this into context of a relationship, let's take it out of like, actually no, let's keep it in parent-child, because to be honest with you, that's what most of us are dealing with. And sorry, it's getting bright out. Like, I have some of the most sensitive eyes, y'all. Like, I opened the blinds because I didn't bring any of my lighting. I didn't bring, a different camera. I am like 4K up, and y'all can see it's, Friday morning. Parent-child. So really, as parents, I think it's innately desired for your child not to lie, right? Because as humans, we don't want to have to determine, or as parents just in general, we don't have to determine if someone's lying to us. But that is also such unevolved, and I'm not calling anyone unevolved, I'm just saying it is a natural deviation from what humans are actually capable of doing when it comes to discernment and building that skill, getting the brain back online, building the prefrontal cortex, that executive functioning, that critical thinking, that we've not realized that that's also natural. It's needed to be able to have built an idea or a perspective of what emotional intelligence is, for us to have evolved into the society that we are. And unfortunately, that comes with negative consequences too, like guns and wars and things that hurt people, because we've deviated from just like survival includes having to be and protect your own. So it's built from there, right? But from a small, where does it start? Where does the seed get planted? It starts with the natural survival of self-protection of like, oh, my emotional needs. So we get locked in and locked out more or less of our emotions, and we don't have access to being with them intentionally. We don't know how to actually use emotion to build in our lives. And because of not understanding, deviancy is important, because if we block it out, if we deny, don't be a deviant, don't test the limits, don't test the boundary, therefore we wouldn't have cars. We wouldn't have this cell phone that I am, streaming from. We wouldn't have the things that we have to be connected. But I think it's now time to realize that there's been such a big disconnect because we've not considered that we can't have one without the other, that we can't have escapism without deviancy. We can't have recovery without being unwell. We can't have good versus like good without bad. So when we deny deviancy, when we deny ourselves, letting ourselves step outside that comfort zone, do we realize that the true test comes into like, okay, which one are we actually, what reality are we in right now? And so this is where parents, I think, want children to just not be deviant, but really I've found that parents just want to understand how to react. How to respond. They want their child to know how to respond. So they can't understand responses if they don't understand reactions either. So where this becomes problematic is when a child doesn't necessarily feel safe to respond or get a response that doesn't feel like is not safe. Does the mask stay on for the child? Because remember, it's natural to want to protect that ego of like, oh my gosh, my parents not going to accept me because I broke this thing. But it is really about the response. And so if you're building off of parental narratives that did not include deviation, did not include lying being an acceptable thing, then more than likely you're naturally just kind of falling into the world of escaping from your responses. I hope that makes sense. Really, so this is where it becomes problematic, and especially when it comes into the addiction world. Again, I'm not going into like the criminal deviancy, but it comes in from masking from emotions that we don't, not only, so once we mask ourselves, because as children, we don't know that the mask exists, but we put on this mask and it becomes unidentifiable to whenever it is that we are being true to ourselves. And true to ourselves and authentic can be the same thing, but not always. But it is, we don't know when the mask is on. we have disconnected ourselves from a reality that we trust as the reality that we want to be in. So I find this a lot, okay. Am I disconnected? I find this a lot, with people recovering from addiction, is that they have to reconnect. They have to figure out when they actually felt real. Damn it, really? Sorry. Probably gonna have to do this talk again, because I probably should have brought my computer, because my phone is like, yeah, it's pretty much frozen at this point, but I guess I'll go on. So I would just, I'm going to put this out there. So for my personal experiences, those are most of my professional experiences of like, okay, when is a kid really being a kid? Because when you're young, you don't really know. You're still developing your identity. You're still developing, and as parents, you're still developing your identity as a parent. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna keep it on Instagram, but I'm gonna have to redo Facebook. So let's talk real quick about how this really set in for me, given I don't have any kids. However, I am a parent for a lot of people. So I had to work a lot on what did my deviancy look like? So I had to figure out where my deviancy and where my escapism came into play for myself. So my deviation, which again is more based off of needs protection, I see a lot in my working history. So I learned this a lot being and around the deviants, labeled deviants, of our country working in the prison system. And I found myself oddly comfortable around people who had hurt other people and who were in prison, who were doing something illegal, who had deviated from the natural order of our society. But what I found was an immense amount of intelligence. I saw people, there's so many smart people. We're just going to have to shut that down. There's so many smart people in prison, so many innovative people that could build things from nothing. And it was separated from the rest. And this is probably, I don't know who would buffer this, but of course this message is not something that the whole population is going to particularly agree with, but it's science, and it's not quite religious, but it's not quite science, but it's just natural observation. Everyone's deviancy patterns are different. Now, when you go into the criminal deviancy, you really just, it's more wants based. So if you don't go after what you want, you're never going to know what you need until and actually know if what it is that you want. And not all deviancy is bad. So people deviated to get their needs met, but then also sometimes you get lost and then you just you stay in deviant land. But then if you never go for what you want, then you're also trying to escape often. So in my work history, did I see a lot of my deviancy? I went to different populations and I worked within different environments and different settings. And I got a very well-rounded perspective of what society was. Now, keep in mind, that was my professional identity. So where a lot of what I was already in a deviant pattern, because if anyone knows my story, but if not, I'm going to tell you a little bit of it right now. I experienced a lot of disruption and loss in my earlier part of my life. I grew up in a divorced family. I was constantly going back and forth between two households. And then at one point when I was 16, my father was diagnosed with cancer and passed away within 10 months of being diagnosed. And then on top of that, my mother got diagnosed with cancer. And then I was still trying to be in school and still trying to come into the world of understanding who I was, but I was shut down. I was locked out of the other side of who I was, and I was just in I was pushed into deviancy, in my opinion, because a lot of it was just I was going after what I want, which is ultimately why my relationship with food started to deviate from who I was. It's not that being large and beautiful was not like, you know, I was confident when I was close to 400 pounds. I was able to handle myself, but I was restricted. And I was also finding escapism very, very pleasurable. So what this looked like, so I was escaping into my work. So I had become stuck in deviation mode, and I was just self-protecting. I was in self-preservation mode because I didn't want to deal with the grief. I didn't know how to deal with the grief. I had already been overstimulated by just the additional responsibility of having 2 houses, 2 rooms, maintaining 2 different households, emotionally and mentally, 2 different parents. And so that's a lot of responsibility for a child. So this is where the consequence of, you know, our divorce rate, we're going to see this in our children and our mental health, is like having 2 separate households. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you do not know how to navigate and manage stress and be able to really connect with and be mindful of the human experience, because you will get stuck in deviation and ultimately lying to yourself and find yourself in escapism. So my work life, my professional identity was in development. I was in deviation mode for the first part of my life, that I found my purpose, but I was not connected with it. I continued to try to escape it because I didn't know how to value it. There was this whole other world. This is why imposter syndrome tends to come up for people. This is where a lot of people get stuck in addiction, because they're just managing like the discomfort it feels to not really be connected with your life. And so what my escapism looked like was shopping, eating, and traveling. So now all of those things are normal processes. We have to shop. We're part of a capitalist society. We have to eat. It's part of our natural process to stay living. And traveling is one of the most educational experiences that you can have to understand different cultures. But when you're doing it out of not being comfortable with where your true home is, and I don't mean your geographical location or where you were born, I mean who you are. I mean the identity that you hold and the intentionality behind that, then escapism becomes that thing that you don't know how to interchange. What is your authentic self? What is one that you're truly okay being, and who you're being? What are your values and your characteristics? Because your body's going to change. Your body is part of a reactionary sign for you, but your spirit and your identity is the only thing that you're in control over. And so when you have no understanding of how all of those different variables work together, escapism tends to be the thing that you do to serve that discomfort. So I can acknowledge that I was uncomfortable this week. I was anxious. I tried all my coping skills, but at the end of the day, I just needed to get away. I just needed to go to the water. I just needed to catch the sunrise this morning, because that is what was real. That was that I would take me out of the physical responses or reactions that I was having. That was my escape, but I did it intentionally. Whereas before, I was doing it, I was like, oh, I need to see the world. I need to see more. I need to do more. More is out there. More is going to find you whether you go to it or not. Do you have to be intentional about building and pushing yourself outside your comfort zone? Absolutely. But your comfort zone, if not careful, could be escapism and really be getting connected back to the inner parts of yourself, not just the external. So I was, and I saw many great places. I have been to Australia. I have been to Europe. I've been to the islands. I've seen places. However, if I reflect on why I saw those places, I was burnt out and I needed a change. I had been taking care of everyone else for so long that finally I was just like, you know what? I need to get out of here. I need to escape, right? And so I remember whenever I went to Australia in 2019. This was right before COVID hit. It was like November of Yeah, it was November of 2019, because then March 2020 was when COVID hit. So I was in Australia, and I remember I was like, oh my God, I just need to get out. I had just started my private practice. I was like, I need to get out. And I went there and I was like, considering I need to go to it. But before, why I chose Australia was because I chose a place I didn't have to learn the language. I didn't have to learn a whole new culture-ish that I wanted to move. USA was like, I'm out, peace. The problem with that is when I got to this beautiful land of Australia, I would still go back, but it's a very long flight, is that everything was the same. They still deal with the capitalists. They still deal with the racism. They still deal with corruption. They still deal with all of it. So I realized, I was like, wow, I'm really about to uproot my whole life because of this uncomfortable feeling that is within me. So it doesn't matter what job I take. It doesn't matter what country I go to. If I don't get comfortable with me, with the emotions that sit in with me, then I will continue to not only try to escape from them, but to deviate, sometimes too far off track, that I don't know how to get back in line with what and how this thing feels. And I've continuously done that. I've had to continue to break those patterns. I slowly stepped out and I deviated from what I was told to do. And in turn, every deviation held information. But the older version of me was stuck in that self-sabotage pattern of escapism that I couldn't figure out, okay, what was me? So then ultimately I kept losing the things. I kept losing the things that I was learning, but it was ultimately purposeful because it continued to figure out, like, we have to deviate in order to respond to, like, oh no, this is truly what it is that I want. So deviation is necessary to get to what we want, and escapism is wanting what it is that we actually need to do, which is to sit with that discomfort, to be intentional about, like, okay, I need to sit with the discomfort as well as go experience the escape. I hope that makes sense for y'all. So when you really, what's the difference, Sara? Reaction and response. The reaction to escape is where you are really needing to learn your response to why you need to escape. Going inward, right? We have to lie in order to know how to be honest about lying and identify, oh, no, I deviated from that, but this is the true self. This is what I have to be honest about. This is what I did. I am not bad for it, but this is what I did. And lying was hurtful. Lying disrespected any degree of building a shared reality with people. So, that's all I got for that right now. I'm probably going to have to do it again another time because my live deviated. But if you guys want an example, a really good critical thinking kind of documentary that I just watched last night, and it was all about like lying and deviating, and the purpose of it is called Tell Me Who I Am on Netflix, and it's good. It's really good. Okay. But yeah, let me guys know if you guys know if there's a purpose for lying, a purpose for deviation. What was your purpose in deviating from your own plan? What did you learn about going off script and figuring out whether or not you needed to stay on script, or if it was just a really just a subtle difference for you. I hope that made sense, but I really wanted to just kind of put forward, you guys deviating from some of the plan because if it feels right, just remember that you have to stay, you don't have to stay close to the path, but you always have to know how to check back in with where you are in the reality, because that tends to be where people get lost in the sauce and mental illness and addiction starts to come in, is because you get so lost in desire land. You get so lost in not recognizing your needs and knowing what those are and building off of those, because what we desire, what we want is such a strong bond and a strong feeling that we lose that identity of who we are. And that is where we get lost into mental health and addiction land and Delulu land, stuff like that. So it takes a lot of work takes a lot of work to know yourself, but I personally think it's worth it, and I'm here to guide you guys if you ever need it. And yeah, I hope you guys have a good rest of your weekend, and I'm gonna chill out because I need a deviation from some work mode, because that's a lot of identity to be of service and helping other people all the time. Okay, peace. I will see y'all next week.